My mum and dad both worked and all that, and Australia was a different time in those days, being an Aboriginal person, because you were under the Native Protection Act and all those sort of things, and you had to have a pass to get around and other things like that. But there was 11 of us, and we all went on to school. We were able to go to school, and we got jobs and that. And I had a job at the time, and a lady who worked in a forget what they called it in those days. It was something like a Centrelink joint. She said to me one day, "You should join the army, Roy, because you've been interested in the army." And that, because I was in the school cadets when I was at school. And I had a few relatives that had been in the army and in the both wars and all that business. And so I went in. A sergeant came in, and a recruiting bloke, and I sat the exam there and I passed it. Went down to HMO's Rushcutter, down at Rushcutter's Bay, where the recruiting mob was. I did another test set up there, and then I got back on the tram and went out to Watson's Bay, the personnel depot. In 1959 or so, I was in Malaya with with one battalion, 1 RAR. I was there, and then I came home and I was at Holsworthy, and then I was at the parachute school in the airborne platoon at Williamtown, and I was in the 1 battalion. Then it was a pantomic battalion, as they called it then in those days, or pantropic battalion. It was in those days they were all getting ready to fight the nuclear war and different other things like that. And then I went into the special reserve side thing, and then I came in. I'll come back to do the training, and 5 battalion was going to Vietnam. So I spoke to the powers to be there that I knew, and I was on my way to Vietnam. When we got there, the Australians had no camp. We had to build a camp, and all that digging trenches and wiring, and of course we had a few people killed in that time, and of course that really made people settle down and start really working together and that. And at least in Vietnam, you could get a lift around an APC or helicopters and all that. In Malaya and that, there was a lot of walking and all those things, and also travelling by boat up the river, up the Pera River and all that, and walking around out there, carrying all your rations and things like that. And of course, you're broken up into individual companies in Malaya. Like we were at Sungi Seaport, there was others at Lintang, some at Kuala Kangsar, and so you're all separate. I say, where in Vietnam, the whole battalion was anchored in one place. And then that was at Task Force headquarters there at Nui Dat. Now, when we were there, we were the only battalion there, except 1 battalion was going home, and then 6 battalion came, and of course the artillery and other people came aboard. And so therefore you're a much bigger unit, bigger mob. You never got any time off, just about. It was on the go all the time. And you were doing exercises or training, or people went on courses, working every weekend. So we put a lot of time in. Before we went, and had a lot of people who just came back from Vietnam, it came out and spoke to all people in the unit, or especially officers and that, who came back and they said, "Oh, this is what's happening now," and all that. And a lot of people learnt from those things. They may have had some of the North Vietnamese blokes around and that, but if there was a lot of, if they would have really came after us, I'd say. Yeah. But I'd say they were some of the, like their version of the Army Reserve or something like that. Vietcong people. Over a period of time, everyone learnt about what they were like, and that we did cordons and searches of villages, and went into other areas and had contacts there. And of course we ran into the minefields and that they'd put down. And you'll always find mines no matter where you go, whether we like it or not. It's a thing that happens. You mightn't think about it at the time, but once it starts, you know that it's going to be out there. And you need the bionic eye to try and find the damn things. But and of course they shifted them, put them here, put them there, and you end up with a lot of casualties one way or the other. And I think in every war, people have ran into those minefields and that, you know, and that, because minefields also get covered by fire or by somebody, you know, close by. And a hell of a lot of blokes got blown up or got hurt somewhere or another, and that, you know, especially some of those people that were there, like the engineers and all those people who were working on the thing, trying to lift it all the time. We had a few people injured there. There's a couple of youngsters with them too. We had a couple of trucks blowing up with people in there going down the road one day. They were masters of digging those holes and tunnels and all that business and that. And I think they may have learnt that from years ago when the Japanese were in there and that, because they used to dig tunnels and all that, so they just continued on from there. But they were awesome, those tunnels and those defensive positions they dug. We went to Long Kian up north, and we were in a hole with probably a battalion or a couple of battalion-sized places where they'd really dug in and that, and you know, they had tunnels there and everything. Where they build those bunker systems, they're pretty well cleared out, even though there's a lot of bush around them and all that business, and they're pretty hard to see in a lot of cases. But once you come to them, you know they're there. You can tell in certain places by smell and all that. They used to build little fences around the whole area. Little fences about that high. And they would, and every so long along the little fences, they'd probably have a little trap thing, and that used to catch little animals and that they could eat. And it was all clear, all clean, all around that area where everything was brushed aside and that. And it's really good how they did it. And from what I believe, even when they left there, they'd leave someone behind to look after it, and that till they've come back another day, you know. But we never ever struck anyone like that, but a lot of people told us that. And a lot of those places were really well built, there's no doubt about that. You only had to look at some of the areas that were bombed by B-52s and that, you know. It never seemed to have affected them, you know? So they really dug big pits and that and everything was organised in there. Probably it's because they had plenty of years of practice. That was Anzac Day. We went down that Long Green and we was come there and we come across all these bunkers and things like that, and so we stopped and I went forward to have a look at this bunker system and tripped a mine and it went off and heard blowing up. Everything flew up, bits of dirt and trees and God knows what else and that. And all your training starts reacting. Everyone goes into what they were trained to do and that. And you, and as if you're all programmed, you know. And you have known, after a while, and you've been there together, people are all attached to one another and they're really perform to get that person out or to save that person's life. The signallers and that would have sent out a message and that they had a casualty and that they would have got a note of cancelling in, a helicopter come in, and some of the blokes come up to see how I was and all that business, and we was talking there, and they come and the helicopter came in and winched me out, and on my way to Vietcong, to the casualty clearance station and that, and wake up the next morning in a bed, probably the first bed you got for a while, and the doctors come around and tell you what they did and you know what'll probably happen. Oh, I had my leg blown off down here and bits of chunks of meat here and that knocked off me and that, and then I was there for a few days, and I was flown in a plane to Butterworth in Malaya, the Air Force Base there, and from there I came here to Sydney, and then from Sydney I came to, they sent me to Concord and I had a few operations there, and I was in there for about 4 months, and then I was out, and then I went back again to the hospital for checkups and that, and then come back and went to personnel depot and ended up back in 5 RAR. a lot of those national service blokes and that it went back into the civilian life, and a lot of them went on to bigger and better things and done well for themselves. But I got out of the army in 2096, 96 or 95, yeah. We've been all around Australia and that's what we're doing in Western Australia and all that business. We were talking to young people over there and that, not only Aboriginal kids, but other kids too, and that about joining the military and getting jobs and going back to school to be educated, and the same as in the Northern Territory. They come down, put them into Kapuka, and that, as a matter of fact, I think not long ago I was down there were 900 odd young people there going through doing their recruit course, and that's not only Aboriginal kids but other kids, and that's just in the army, you know. And that they're on better pay than I was when I was in the army, but I got, what's the name of that? But they, and they got chances to learn a trade or whatever it is. The Australian Army only had 3 regular battalions in those days when I joined. So most people ended up as ground pounders, which I didn't mind anyway. But what's his name? And they had a few artillery units and all that, but now they got a hell of a lot of things and more technology type things and that, you know, more better equipment. Most Aboriginal people in that couldn't get in the military and all that at the time. But over a period of time, it's like anything, like in the First World War, because they were losing so many people, they'd take anyone, you know, and that happens after a while. As an old pommy bloke said to me one day, in the first lot to go to the war was your best people. After that, it's the leftovers. And that's what it ended to be. But a lot of people went to the First World War, and a lot of them, as they're finding out now, the War Museum has been researching this, and it was only a couple of hundred at one stage, but it's got a lot bigger than that now. And also, even in the Second World War, and that it was they could stay in Australia and all that. See, in March, I think it was March the 17th this year, was the 75th anniversary of the forming of the Torres Strait Island Regiment. And they were all Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal people in that. Of course, it was illegal for them to be in the army in the First World War, and even in the Second World War, in as that they were under the Native Protection Acts, and that went on for years and years and years. And they had to carry those exemption certificates, right? And if you're caught in the street after 6 o'clock without one, you went to jail. And even blokes who were POWs in the Second World War were the same. But they went. Some of them said they were Indians or New Zealanders or what's his name? I think there was an Aboriginal bloke who went to Second World War, and he ended up going to New Zealand later in life, and he became one of the most famous persons in New Zealand, now around his town where he come from and that. But people also forget that in the First World War, there was an Aboriginal woman who was a matron in a hospital. But she wasn't with the Australian Army, she couldn't join that, she joined the Canadian Army. And she was a matron in the First World War, in the Western Front and over around Malta and Italy. And it's a good thing that they do still remember them people. You know, as I pointed out to a bloke at the War Museum, the only people here that count are all them blokes there on that wall. All them dead blokes. They're the people who count. They're the people who were saying, you know, I said, you and I don't matter, but those people on that wall do. You know, and that's what we've got to remember. So all those people who's got their names on that wall who got killed, you know, we don't count. And it's quite a terrible thing, actually. The army is a good life. I met some great blokes. Blake said to me, what did you ever get out of the army? I said, nothing. But I made lifelong friends, and wherever I go, we sit down and laugh and yarn about these things, even though some of them are terrifying experiences at times, but we enjoyed ourselves, you know, and we enjoyed one another's company.